Today we are going to construct this bush camp cabin. It's going to be built on skids and it's designed as a temporary and portable structure until you have a chance to build something more permanent. Okay, we're going to start with 2x8 floor joists. You can see these are 8 feet long, and I'm just going to copy this and move it over to exactly 8 feet outside to outside. And I'm going to put on a rim joist on either end. I'm going to lay out the floor joists at 24 inches on center, and I'm going to make sure that this first joist is at exactly 48 inches so it will line up with the plywood. Since this is a temporary structure and a portable one, 24 inches on center is going to be just fine for our intents and purposes. Now I'm going to make some 4x8 sheets of plywood that is a 1/4 inch thick, because this is not the subfloor, this is actually the underside of the floor. And I'm showing OSB here, but you can use plywood or whatever you feel like. So if you did this correctly, 2 sheets of plywood should fit exactly on top of the joist. Now we are going to turn the whole thing over, and you might need to get some help with this because it's going to be very heavy. Now I'm going to make the skids for underneath, and they should be 16 feet long, and you'll figure out why in a minute. You want to place one edge flush with the front edge and then about 18 inches in from the side. This way you only need 2 skids instead of 3. If you look at a span chart on the internet, you can see that for 24-inch spacing, you can span a 2x8 at least 8 foot 6 inches. Now we're going to put in the insulation. You can put up to R30 in a 8-inch floor, but you can use whatever insulation you like. Here we're going to use the pink stuff. Next, we are going to put on the vapor barrier, and that will keep moisture from traveling down through the floor and causing mold problems. One thing I forgot to do is put some metal mesh on the bottom. If you're using OSB, the little critters love to chew through it. So it's important to protect the OSB. If you're using plywood, it's probably not so bad, but I would still put on the metal mesh. Or you can just use hardware cloth or something similar. Now we can turn it right side up and continue with the subfloor. Okay, maybe I'll show the wall build before the subfloor. The outside studs and the top and bottom plate are going to be 2x6s, and the interior studs are 2x4s. And I'll show you why in a minute. First, let's finish this subfloor so we can put the wall on top of it. Just like the bottom, two sheets of 4x8 should fit exactly on the top. Now we can put the wall on top of the subfloor. I'm going to build all four walls first. I'm going to have one window on each side, so I'm going to frame those in between the studs just to make it a little bit easier. Since the other side wall is exactly the same, I'm just going to copy it over. Now I'm going to frame a 36-inch door into the front wall. I got a little confused on the width of the door here, but I wanted to keep that middle stud because that's going to be a cripple above the door. Now I'm just going to put in a header above the door. Now I'm going to put 2-inch rigid foam insulation on the outside of the walls. Now I need to cut out the foam for the window and door openings. Now I'm going to put on the exterior plywood and orient it vertically because the end result is going to look kind of like board and batten. It's important to make sure that the exterior plywood covers the floor joists and any other structure underneath it because it will rot out faster than you can say pressure treated wood. 2 4x8 sheets should fit perfectly across, and you do not want to overlap them at the corners. Now we can cut out the plywood for the window and door openings. Now we are going to put in a ledger board for the porch and the posts that are going to hold up the second floor. And the floor joists for the porch are going to be 2x8s. The posts are going to be 4x4s, which are actually 3.5 by 3.5. So we're going to have to put a 1/2 inch space in between the rim joist, and you can fill it with 1/2 inch plywood or other material, or you can just leave it. We're going to have 2 posts that sit directly over the skids. Now I'm just going to make a beam at the top of the posts out of 2 2x8s on either side of the post. Now we can start building the second floor, and I'm using 2x10 floor joists because they are spanning 8 feet across. To leave a 3-foot gap at the end so that we can build some stairs there. I'm going to make these joists overhang the beam by about 12 inches. And these joists will be 16 inches on center. We just need a rim joist on the end. Now we need some blocking over the front wall to separate the inside from the outside. And don't forget to put a vapor barrier over this front area. That will be insulated from underneath a little bit later. Now I'm just going to put some subfloor on the second floor, and I'm going to put it perpendicular to the joists for added strength. And 3 sheets should fit exactly. Now I'm going to start on the walls for the second floor, and they're only going to be 4.5 feet tall. You could make them any height you want, depending on how much headroom you want. You could make them 1 foot tall, you could make them 6 feet tall, you could make them 8 feet tall. But I'm going to save some lumber here and only make them 4.5 feet tall. That will still give me plenty of headroom upstairs. And these walls will be built exactly the same as they were downstairs, with 2x6s around the outside and 2x4s on the interior. I didn't show the 2x4s here, but I will fix that later. I'm just going to extend the top plate all the way across to tie those two walls together. After looking at this, I've decided that I don't really need that extra stud at the end of that wall, so I'm going to take those out. And I forgot to make the interior studs 2x4s, so I'm going to have to go through and do those all one by one. Now I'm going to put on a second top plate to tie everything together. The first top plate is 16 feet long. But if you don't have a 16-foot stud, you can break it in the middle, but make sure that it breaks over a stud. And if you do break it in two pieces, then make sure that you don't break the top plate in the same place. So you want to put one 4-foot top plate on the end and then one 4-foot piece in the middle to stagger the seams. And make sure to overlap the top plates at the corners. Now we're going to put the rigid foam insulation on the outside of the upper floor walls. We will also be putting regular batt insulation on the inside between the studs. Now I'm just going to copy these pieces over to the other side. And finish off the end wall. Now we can put the plywood exterior on the second floor, and this has to go on before the rafters. I made a little mistake here by using a piece that was not 4 feet wide, but I will fix it later. Here I'm just going to finish off the wall underneath the second floor. I think this is where I realized my mistake. Easy to fix. Whoops, we seem to be missing a piece of siding. Oh well, put that back on. Now I can fix my mistake on the upper part. Okay, nearly halfway there. Okay, now I'm going to cut some 2x6 rafters for the roof, and I'm not going to go into rafter cutting detail here because I have a separate video on making rafters, which you can check out. Here I'm just trying to figure out where the ridge board is going to go. That doesn't look quite right. Oh, I see I need to be flush with the end. This ridge beam is going to be 16 feet long. There are several ways to do this. This is just one. Now I'm going to copy these rafter pairs to the back and then space them 16 inches on center. I should have just cut this ridge board at 16 feet, but I forgot what I was doing. So now we're going to put blocking in between each rafter, and you can put it straight up and down, but you will need to use something bigger than a 2x6, and you may have to rip it down so that it fits exactly because you don't want a gap. Or you can put it perpendicular like I did here. You're also going to need ventilation for your roof. So you want to put a hole in every one of these blocks, and I'll explain more about that later. Once you have the holes cut out, you'll need to put some screen on the inside so you can keep out the bugs and the birds and other animals. On this side of the cabin, I'm going to put some steel roofing sheets, and before I put those up, I need to put up furring strips that are 1x3 or 1x4. That's what you have. And those go up every 2 feet on center, and then one at the ridge. Here I'm just going to bring in a steel sheet that I created previously. Just lined up with the edge of the roof. And it doesn't matter if it's sticking up a little bit because there's going to be a drip edge covering it. These particular sheets overlap at the high point, and I don't think they're based on any particular manufacturer. That's just the way I drew them. You should get sheets that are the exact length that you need, plus 1 or 2 inches. But if you just have to buy standard sheets at the store, instead of cutting them down to size, you can just let them hang over the end. The other side of the roof, I'm going to do a little bit differently, but I still need blocks on this side to keep the critters out. I'm going to have exposed tongue and groove on this side of the ceiling, so I don't need ventilation in the blocking. I'm just going to use some 1x6 tongue and groove on the rafters first and just make sure that the ends of them land over a rafter. You don't want your seams to line up, so make sure you stagger your seams at least every other row. Whoops, I didn't need quite that many. I'm going to fix these bird mouth cutouts because it's starting to annoy me. Now we're going to start on the gable wall framing. There's going to be a window in this gable end, but this is not a load-bearing wall, so we don't need a header. You can just put one 2x6 over the window, and then I'm just going to put one cripple on either side and then one above the window. Now I'm going to put the exterior sheathing on the gable end. Now I'm going to cut out the window opening from the plywood. Now I'm just going to copy the framing and the sheathing for the gable and copy it over to the other side because it's exactly the same, except in reverse. I'm just trying to find the center so I can spin it around and line it up properly. Now we can finish the deck, and I'm going to use 2x6s that are spaced about a 1/4 inch apart. I didn't show this before, but I thought I better include it so that you are aware that you're going to need some Z flashing in between the upper and lower pieces of sheathing. And that will need to go on before you put your second level of sheathing on the outside of the wall. It's kind of a small thing, but it's very important, and you need to have it so you don't get water behind your sheathing. I'm not going to show it on every seam. I'm just going to do it in this one place so you get an idea of what it looks like. Now I'm going to put on some corner trim and the battens so it has a more finished look. You should overlap the trim pieces on this side, and you can make one piece shorter than the other if you want to for visual aesthetics, but it's not necessary. Now I'm just putting the battens every 2 feet to make it look like real board and batten. Just cutting out the trim that's going over the windows. Now I'm just going to make some basic windows for illustration purposes. If I was actually going to build this, I would put in some operable windows in the loft. Now I'm just going to use the same 1x4s that I used for the battens as trim around the door. Now I'm going to put some rigid foam insulation on this side of the roof. Then I'm going to put some plywood sheathing on top of that. And you can finish this off with shingles or whatever you like. Now I'm going to put in the finished flooring on the first floor, and I'm not going to show each individual board. I'm just going to make it look like finished flooring. And voila, beautiful. Now I'm just going to put some plywood sheathing on the walls. You can use plywood or tongue and groove or whatever your heart desires. I probably should have shown this earlier, but I am going to put some insulation on the inside, and in order to make it easier to do in SketchUp, I'm going to create a cross section so I can just get inside the house. And I'm just going to put regular batt insulation on the inside. Every place in the wall where there's a stud is a bridge for heat to travel from the inside of the house to the outside. And we want to minimize those areas. That's why we have solid sheet of rigid insulation on the outside. I'm also going to put some insulation under the floor above the porch and then cover that with sheeting. The plywood on the underside could just be a 1/4 inch because it's not structural. You can cut the sheathing around the beam so there's no holes, but I'm not going to show it here. And we might as well paint it the same color as the house. For this particular kind of roof, you're going to need baffles so that the air can travel from the soffit to the ridge. These baffles will be behind the insulation so you get good airflow. And I'm going to try to make a rough drawing here. It's not exact. This is kind of an exaggeration. I think they're really only like 1 or 2 inches deep. Okay, that's way too big. I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller, a little bit more realistic. These baffles go in between each rafter bay, and you will need to read the directions because they do have specific spacing. But I'm sure you get the general idea. Then you can put your insulation over top of that and then your ceiling material on top of that, if it's tongue and groove or plywood or whatever. You can build some stairs to get up to the loft, but I'm not going to show that today.